I reached out to greet the new CEO. Jack Turner glanced at my hand and said coldly, "We don't shake hands with people who won't be here much longer." The room laughed. The meeting was still being recorded. I stayed calm and replied, "Then you just lost $2.3 billion. Jack Turner, the newly appointed chief executive officer, walked past me as if I were a chair pulled too far from the table. He shook hands down the line, firm grips, practiced smiles, a quick joke here and there when he reached me. I still held my hand out. He looked at it, then at me, and kept moving. He didn't stop walking when he said it. "We don't shake hands with people who won't be here much longer." The sentence landed harder than a slap. A few people laughed, unsure but obedient. Someone else looked down at their notes. No one said my name. I am Rene Kaplan. For over a decade, I operated where decisions became irreversible behind capital approvals, risk controls, and contractual safeguards that never made headlines, but kept the company standing when confidence failed. I wasn't loud. I was effective. Jack Turner was loud enough for both of us. He took his place at the head of the table, still standing. "Let's be efficient," he said. "We're introducing a new leadership culture." His eyes flicked toward me. "Detached. That means eliminating legacy roles that don't align with where we're going." Then casually, like clearing a calendar invite, "Rene Kaplan effective immediately." No explanation, no review, just applause, adjacent silence. Jack talked about agility, about decisiveness, about moving forward without sentiment. He framed cruelty as clarity and expected gratitude for the honesty. HR sat beside him, nodding at the right beats, fingers already on prepared paperwork. I kept my posture neutral. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I've learned that when men like Jack are performing authority, resistance only feeds the act. He wanted a reaction. He wanted the room to see him dominated instead. I waited until he finished and turned to HR. Not to him. "Can you clarify something for the record?" I asked calmly. "When does the termination become legally effective?" The room shifted. Pens froze. Jack smiled thin and impatient. "Now," he said. "I'll need the exact language," I replied, still measured. "And the timestamp." That was the first moment his confidence hesitated. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. Shock had already settled into humiliation. Humiliation compressed into something quieter, heavier pressure. The kind that doesn't explode, the kind that waits. You've been listening closely, so take a second to notice how you're sitting right now. Gently adjust your posture. Place both feet flat on the floor and let your spine straighten just enough to feel supported, not stiff. Where are you listening from today? If stories like this resonate with you, stay with me and consider subscribing. It helps this space grow and keeps these conversations going because what happened next didn't unfold in that room. It started the moment everyone thought it was finished. After the meeting ended, the noise faded, but the weight didn't. What stayed with me wasn't Jack Turner's voice. It was the years he erased with a sentence. I sat there collecting myself, and the memories came back the way they always do when pride is tested quietly, insistently, without permission. There were nights when I stayed long after the executives left, correcting assumptions baked into presentations that would have collapsed deals by morning. I remember rewriting risk language at midnight because someone wanted speed more than accuracy. I remember signing off on safeguards that prevented penalties nobody ever heard about. Those moments never came with praise. They came with silence, which I accepted because the work mattered. Jack Turner arrived after most of that was done. He inherited stability and called it momentum. He stepped into rooms where the hardest decisions had already been made and spoke as if clarity had always existed. Deals I had structured from the ground up became his vision once he shook the right hands. I watched him take credit with a confidence that suggested he believed it was earned simply by showing up last. His resume was flawless. Top schools, clean titles, media-friendly soundbites. He spoke in complete sentences that said nothing risky. He trusted labels more than language, headlines more than footnotes. Contracts to him were formalities handled by other people. Authority, he believed, flowed downward from the name on the door. Sitting there, replaying his dismissal, I realized something uncomfortable and precise. Jack didn't know who I was. Not really. He didn't know what I controlled, what I reviewed, or what required my signature before it became real. He saw a role, not a system, a cost, not a lever. That wasn't arrogance alone. It was negligence dressed up as confidence. I opened my laptop out of habit, not panic. My inbox was quiet, except for one search result I hadn't looked at in years. An old thread surfaced, dated before Jack's arrival, flagged and archived. The subject line was unremarkable. Inside was confirmation of a delegated authority tied to capital release. Written clearly, approved cleanly, and never rescinded. Jack's name wasn't on it. Mine was. I sat back, feeling the pressure shift. The anger didn't spike. It narrowed. Years of being overlooked, compressed into a single, undeniable fact. He hadn't just underestimated me. He had removed the one person who understood where the real weight sat. That realization didn't restore my dignity. It sharpened it. If you've ever been treated unfairly, this story is for you. I didn't rush to do anything after leaving the room. Calm arrived first, not as relief, but as structure. I sat with the facts and let them line up the way they always had. I wasn't just a former employee. I was the final checkpoint. Years earlier, during a financing round, nobody remembered anymore. Legal had insisted on a single point of authorization. Speed demanded clarity and clarity demanded one signature. Mine. I reviewed the covenants, the release conditions, the reputational safeguards. I argued for language that could stop money mid-flight if conduct during negotiations caused material harm. It wasn't dramatic. It was practical. The clause was clean and specific. Capital could be withdrawn immediately if documented behavior undermined trust or standing. No warnings, no cure period, no committee vote. The authorities sat with the managing signatory. Me. I confirmed it once more, reading slowly without emotion. Jack Turner never had. He treated appendices as administrative noise. He trusted summaries and delegated the rest to him. Contracts were rails already laid, not systems that required inspection. He believed procedure existed to support power, not restrain it. That belief had made him comfortable. I checked the record next. The meeting, the handshake, the words, the dismissal. Every second had been captured. The company recorded executive sessions as standard practice, archived automatically, retained for governance review. Jack knew that policy. He just didn't respect it. Control doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like silence narrowing into certainty. I understood with precision how few steps remained. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger cloud sequencing. This required order. I documented the facts, time, language, participants. I saved the file, labeled clearly, and closed my laptop. Nothing impulsive had happened. Nothing emotional was required. Jack thought authority was something you asserted. I knew it was something you exercised. He had removed me because he believed I was ornamental. In doing so, he activated the only mechanism that didn't require his approval. The clause didn't care about intent, only impact. The impact had been recorded, preserved, and signed. When I stood up, my hands were steady. The system was already moving. I just hadn't told it to yet. I knew exactly where control lived. Not in the room, not in titles, but in agreements written long before Jack arrived. The moment would come soon, triggered not by emotion, but by process. I would act quietly, decisively, and within the lines he ignored. The consequences would unfold without drama. Because systems don't argue, they execute. And once set in motion, they don't pause for regret, explanations, or second chances. Control meant choosing when to move, and knowing the outcome was already locked in place, waiting for a signal. I waited until the building was quiet. Not empty, just quiet enough that no one expected anything to change. There was no anger left in me. No satisfaction either. Emotion would have slowed the sequence, and I didn't have time for drag. I sat at the small desk in my apartment, phone face down, documents already open on my screen. I reviewed them once more, not because I doubted them, but because precision matters when consequences are permanent. Everything aligned. Authority, scope, trigger, nothing subjective, nothing personal. I turned the phone over and dialed one number. It rang once. Yes, the voice answered. Execute the withdrawal, I said. Full amount, effective immediately. There was a pause, professional and brief. No surprise, no protest. Confirmed, he replied. Reason code documented conduct during negotiations. Understood. That was the entire conversation. No warnings were issued. No leverage was displayed. I didn't explain what had happened or why. Explanations invite debate, and debate was no longer relevant. The framework had already decided. I ended the call and closed the file. The system didn't need supervision. It needed initiation somewhere far from my apartment. Processes were already moving. Notifications generated. Balances recalculated. Dependencies exposed. No one was being punished. A condition had simply been met. I stood up and washed my hands, noticing how ordinary the moment felt. No shaking, no adrenaline, just completion. The kind that comes from finishing a checklist you built yourself years earlier. Minutes later, my phone vibrated. Then again, I didn't look. Confirmation wasn't necessary. I knew how quickly capital reacts when certainty disappears. Liquidity doesn't argue. It withdraws. What Jack Turner believed was stability had been contingent all along. He just never bothered to ask on whose terms. He thought removal was an ending. It was a release. By the time midnight passed, the withdrawal was final. No appeal window, no courtesy delay. The door everyone assumed was bolted shut had been designed to open outward. I slept without setting an alarm. The outcome was already traveling through systems that don't pause for ego or intention. By morning, it would arrive everywhere at once, and nothing I felt or didn't feel would change what had already been executed. It wasn't revenge, and it wasn't relief. It was alignment restored, risk corrected, and a boundary enforced without ceremony. I understood then that restraint is its own form of power. You don't raise your voice when the system is listening. You speak once clearly and let structure do the rest. That night, nothing dramatic happened in my apartment. Everything dramatic happened elsewhere, exactly as designed. Control settled fully, and I waited, knowing the consequences were already moving faster than anyone could interrupt them tonight onward. You might not believe what happens next, and I want to hear your reaction. Jack Turner walked into the office that morning with the confidence of a man who believed the hardest part was already behind him. His jacket was crisp, his expression relaxed, his stride unhurried. He greeted assistants by name, nodded at managers, and moved straight toward his glass office as if the building itself belonged to him. Whatever discomfort yesterday had created, he clearly believed it had passed. It hadn't. The first call came before he set his bag down. He waved it away, smiling, letting it ring. The second call followed immediately, then a third. This time, he answered, still casual, until his expression tightened. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the shift. I had seen that look before. The moment confidence meets information, it can't absorb fast enough. By mid-morning, doors were closing. Legal convened an emergency session, pulling partners off unrelated matters, sealing themselves into conference rooms that hadn't been booked. Finance stopped sending routine updates and started requesting confirmations that should have been automatic. Jack's calendar quietly emptied itself as meetings were canceled without explanation. Then the number surfaced. $2.3 billion no longer sat where the plan said it would. Not delayed, not reallocated, gone. Entire projections unraveled in seconds. Assumptions collapsing because they had been built on certainty that no longer existed. This wasn't an accounting error. It wasn't a technical issue. It was absence. Jack tried to label it a disruption. He used words like temporary and correctable, but every call pushed him further from that story. Banks didn't ask questions. They asked for statements. Legal didn't offer options. They outlined exposure. Each conversation narrowed his range of motion. Somewhere between the third and fourth briefing, understanding arrived. Not fully formed, but sharp enough to hurt. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. It had been waiting before Jack could speak publicly. The market moved. Pre-opening indicators dipped, then slid further as analysts connected pieces faster than executives could respond. Confidence reacts quicker than leadership. By the time the first alert crossed internal channels, the narrative had already escaped. People began watching him differently. Not with hostility, but with calculation. He had entered the morning as a decision maker. By noon, he was a variable. I didn't need updates to know how it felt inside that building. Chain reactions are predictable when you understand leverage. One withdrawal exposes another and another until momentum turns against itself. Jack had thought authority insulated him from consequence. That morning taught him otherwise. By the time he prepared a statement, the story had already been written elsewhere without his voice. I didn't expect Jack Turner to call me himself when his name appeared on my phone. I knew the performance was over and the negotiation had begun. His voice was smooth, careful, almost friendly. Let's talk, he said, as if we hadn't already done exactly that. He started with incentives, a consulting role, a transition package, public praise. We moved too fast, he said. Rehearsed humility layered over urgency. I let him finish. When he paused, I asked him to put it in writing. He didn't like that. The tone shifted. His words hardened. You can't just pull money like that, he said. There are consequences. I answered with dates, clauses, and the exact language he had ignored. Silence followed. He tried again, louder this time. You embarrassed the company. I corrected him. The meeting recorded you. That was when he stopped pretending. He blamed advisors. He blamed timing. He blamed me. If you hadn't reacted, he said, none of this would have happened. I didn't interrupt. I waited until the accusation finished. Then I said calmly, your conduct triggered the clause. Nothing else. He went quiet, not reflective, calculating. He asked what it would take to fix it. I told him there was nothing to fix. The process had executed. He exhaled sharp and frustrated. You planned this, he said. I answered truthfully. I prepared for it. The call ended without agreement. Minutes later, messages started arriving. Board members requesting clarification. Legal asking for context. The questions weren't about the withdrawal anymore. They were about Jack's judgment, about the meeting, about why no one had intervened. By afternoon, the board convened without him. I knew because the agenda was familiar. Governance, risk, conduct. Jack tried calling again. I declined. The conversation had moved past persuasion. He had wanted authority without restraint. Now, restraint was examining him. When I finally received confirmation that the board was reviewing his behavior during the meeting, I felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, just tension settling into inevitability. Jack Turner had come looking for leverage. He found accountability. The room he had dominated was now measuring him instead. And this time, he wasn't controlling the narrative. The system was. It didn't matter how many times he replayed the moment. The facts were fixed. The record existed. The board would not debate tone. They would assess exposure. That was the shift Jack never anticipated. Power was no longer performative. It was procedural. Each step reduced his options until only outcomes remained. I watched from a distance, answering questions precisely, withholding commentary, letting silence do the work. By evening, his allies were careful, neutral, preparing for separation. Confrontation had given way to review. Review would give way to consequences. The board did not need my opinion. They needed the facts. I had already given them all. It may sound clear so far, but the truth is only just beginning to surface. I wasn't invited when the board reconvened. and that told me everything. The tone had shifted before a single word was spoken. Someone reopened the recording, and the room went quiet. My absence no longer mattered. The footage did. The video played without commentary at first. Jack Turner's entrance, his smile, the way he shook every hand except mine. The pause, then his voice, crisp and dismissive. "We don't shake hands with people who won't be here much longer." A few chuckles followed. Someone coughed. Another voice murmured, "That's decisive." The screen kept going. They watched him fire me publicly. They watched him posture. They watched him enjoy it. What had felt humiliating in the moment now read as reckless. One director leaned forward. "Why was this set on record?" Another asked, "Did anyone intervene?" No one answered. The conversation moved away from me without ceremony. My name surfaced only as context, then disappeared. What replaced it was language I recognized: exposure, optics, governance failure. Someone said, "This isn't about her." Another replied, "It's about leadership risk." Jack wasn't in the room. That absence carried weight. They replayed the moment again, stopping on his expression. "This is contempt," one director said. Another added, "And it's documented." Silence followed, heavier than agreement. I listened to the updates afterward, not through drama, but through process. Legal outlined implications. Finance explained reactions. Communications asked whether a response could contain the damage. The answer came back evenly. "The market has already responded." Then the suggestion surfaced almost gently. "We should consider a confidential vote." "No outrage, no defense, just procedure?" someone asked. "Secret ballot?" The reply was immediate. Yes, that was the shift. When institutions stop debating intent and start measuring liability, outcomes become mechanical. I felt a quiet satisfaction settle. Not pleasure but alignment. This wasn't vindication, it was correction. By the time the session ended, no one spoke about reconciliation. They spoke about succession planning, about interim authority, about timelines. Jack Turner had built his authority on tone and speed. In that room, tone had turned against him, and speed now worked elsewhere. I didn't need to be present to know how it ended. When a board changes its language, the decision has already begun. All that remains is the vote counted in silence. It happened without applause, without speeches, without mercy. That was the part I respected. Institutions correct quietly when they are serious. I closed my notes, thanked no one, and waited. What they called governance I recognized as gravity. Once it pulls, nothing argues. Jack would learn that next in private with no audience to save him. The lesson would spread faster than rumors carried by minutes and signatures. I learned about the freeze before Jack Turner did. That detail mattered because it meant the center of gravity had already shifted. Power doesn't announce itself when it's leaving. It simply stops responding. Jack was still holding meetings, still issuing direction, still signing nothing that would stick. The board's decision came quietly, framed as precaution. His operational authority was suspended pending review, no alerts, no speeches, just a recalibration that removed his hands from the controls. The effect was immediate. Executives who had deferred yesterday now asked permission twice. Decisions slowed, then stalled. Legal approved nothing without written confirmation. Finance redirected questions upward and received none back. Jack's office light stayed on, but the building no longer moved around him. Then the media arrived. Not aggressively, not yet. Requests for comment, questions about liquidity, about leadership continuity. Jack attempted reassurance, but his words had lost friction. Statements drafted under his name waited for approval that never came. I watched the coverage without reaction. Satisfaction didn't feel warm. It felt exact. This was what happens when authorities borrowed and suddenly recalled. The image remains, but the function is gone. By afternoon, Communications issued a revised release outlining the company's forward strategy. I read it once, then again. Something was missing. Jack Turner's name had been removed. No explanation, just absence. Interim leadership was referenced instead. Neutral and temporary. That omission carried more weight than any announcement. It told investors what the board would not say aloud. Jack was no longer the future they were willing to attach themselves to. He tried to re-enter the process, scheduling briefings, requesting alignment. Calendars declined him automatically. Assistants redirected him gently. The machine had updated its permissions. I felt a quiet completion settle in. Not triumph, not revenge. Alignment systems were doing what they were designed to do once noise was stripped away. Jack Turner had believed control could be seized quickly and stabilized later. He never reached the later. By the time he understood what had changed, the chair beneath him was already moving inch by inch without ceremony. There were no cheers, no confrontation, just subtraction and subtraction when applied at the top changes everything below it. I recognized the pattern from past crises. Silence, distancing, then quiet replacement. It always looks orderly from the outside. Inside, careers unravel. Jack still occupied the office, but the office no longer recognized him. Authority had detached. Once that happens, recovery is theoretical. Momentum doesn't reverse. It selects a new direction and accelerates. Indifferent to ego, titles, or memory. This transition marked the true end of his tenure. Even before paperwork followed, everyone involved understood it. Though no one said it aloud, that day ended. The decision arrived without drama, delivered in language so procedural it felt antiseptic. Jack Turner was removed following a formal vote, documented, reviewed, and signed. No accusations were announced, no apologies offered, just a conclusion reached through policy. Exactly the way he insisted everything should work. He walked out later that day carrying a thin folder, escorted by process rather than security. The hallway stayed seated. No one stood. No one extended a hand. Conversations continued at a lower volume, careful not to acknowledge the moment. The same room that once laughed now avoided eye contact. It wasn't hostility. It was recognition. I wasn't present, but I didn't need to be. Endings like that are predictable when authority collapses inward. Jack had demanded efficiency and received it. His exit followed the handbook he trusted, stripped of ceremony and witnesses. The call to me came afterward. Polite, urgent, respectful in a way it hadn't been before. They offered everything. My title restored, expanded authority, public acknowledgement, compensation adjusted beyond reason. They framed it as stability, as continuity, as correction. I listened without interrupting. I asked questions about timelines, scope, and governance. They answered carefully, eager now. When they finished, there was a pause waiting for relief. I declined. Not out of spite, not out of pride, out of clarity. Returning would blur the lesson. It would turn consequence into negotiation, and that would cheapen what had just occurred. They tried again, softer. We need you, I replied evenly. You needed me before. Silence followed long enough to feel permanent. Justice doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't humiliate. It completes a sequence and steps aside. Jack Turner learned that too late. I learned it long ago. I closed the conversation and set my phone down. The system had corrected itself. My role in it was finished. Declining wasn't loss. It was alignment. I moved forward without announcements, without statements, without looking back. The space Jack left would fill itself. It always does. The handshake he refused never mattered. What mattered was the structure that noticed, recorded, and responded coldly, completely. I understood then why restraint endures longer than victory. When outcomes are earned through process, they don't invite reversal. No speeches followed. No interviews explained. The result stood on its own. People adjusted. Systems recalibrated. Careers rerouted quietly. That was the real justice, impersonal, consistent, impossible to argue with. Jack Turner's absence became administrative fact, not scandal. My refusal closed the loop. There was nothing left to contest, no role to reclaim, no narrative to spin. The work ahead belonged elsewhere, built on clearer terms, firmer respect, and memory sharp enough to prevent repetition. I walked away knowing the outcome would hold because structures remember what people prefer to forget, and enforcement outlasts ego every single time without warning or mercy there. I didn't announce my next step. I simply took it when the noise faded and the call stopped. A quiet path opened that felt earned rather than offered. I moved toward work that respected boundaries, language that meant what it said, and agreements that treated dignity as operational, not optional. I began again without spectacle. New partners, clear terms, no shortcuts disguised as confidence. I chose rooms where preparation mattered more than volume, and where decisions were made with care for consequences that outlast applause. The change wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, and it held. Looking back, the lesson wasn't about Jack Turner or a boardroom moment. It was about cost. Real power doesn't perform. It doesn't announce itself with gestures or titles. It sits quietly in structure, in signatures, in the discipline to read what others skip. When it moves, it does so without asking permission. Respect works the same way. It isn't a courtesy extended after the fact. It's the price of entry. You pay it up front or you pay later with interest. Systems remember what people forget and they enforce what culture pretends to excuse. I didn't need vindication. I needed alignment. The sequence completed itself once the conditions were met. No celebration followed because none was required. The outcome spoke in numbers, in minutes, in changes that held even when attention moved on. I carry that forward now, building in places where the rules are clear and the consequences are real. I choose partners who understand that silence can be strength and restraint can be decisive. I don't rush decisions. I design them to last. The work continues steadier and cleaner than before. And if there's one truth worth keeping, it's this: authority that demands respect has already lost it. Respect is not symbolic. It is enforceable. I learned to trust processes over promises, records over recollections, and calm over reaction. Each choice narrowed risk and widened purpose. The future I chose rewards preparation, not bravado, and it keeps score without commentary, leaving outcomes intact long after voices fade. That is the cost, paid every time. The real lesson wasn't about losing a job or winning a confrontation. It was about understanding where value truly lives and protecting it quietly. I learned that dignity isn't something you demand in the moment. It's something you build into your work long before anyone tests it. Emotion matters, but discipline lasts when you choose clarity over noise and preparation over pride. Outcomes have a way of correcting themselves. I'm curious what detail in this story stayed with you the most. Was it the ignored handshake, the clause no one read, or the moment the system responded? If you've lived through something similar, would you share your story with us? Where are you listening from today if this resonated?